Hello, everyone, and welcome to this live episode of To the Moon, Allison, where we talk about the top and trending works in fantasy, science fiction, speculative fiction, and romance. I'm your host, Allison Martine Hubbard, author of works of contemporary romance and speculative fiction. I am so glad to be joined again today by author James Rollins. Hi, Dr. Jim. How are you?
I appreciate the doctor moniker, Allison. And again, thank you for having me back on the program. I had an enjoyable conversation last time, so thanks for having me back. I was afraid I was going to get banned, but
you would never get banned. We can talk about all the spay and neutering, and we will never ban you from the show. And we were just talking before we went live about how we need like the emotional support animal to calm us beforehand. I don't have that. I'm extra stressed because my daughter is at outdoor ed. I can't even pet her. I have other kids, and none of them are pets, so I really shouldn't treat them the same. But some of them do act like that sometimes and say pet me. So I'm wondering if the same thing happens, but I have to take them to pediatricians, not veterinarians, but I'm pretty sure you have more schooling than they do. So I think you'd be fine.
it is challenging because you're dealing with patients that can't speak. So it's always fun trying to figure out, I always describe veterinary medicine as more psychology with the patient, the client across the table from you, and necessarily the medical aspect of the patient sitting on the table between you two.
Yeah. It's like, and who's paying the bills here? It's not the poodle. It's usually, is the person across the table happy? And it's kind of similar because not that long ago, my eldest and I were both sick. So we went to urgent care and they took us in together. And my daughter's 12 years old. And the doctor's looking at me and it's like, okay, mom, tell me what's wrong. And I just look at her like, she speaks. You can talk to her. Like, I don't need to translate. Like, I'll tell you what's wrong with me and she'll tell you what's wrong with her. And it's pretty much the same stuff. And we're both here for drugs. So just write our prescriptions and let us go on our way. But yeah, littler ones, it's a little different. So maybe a pediatrician for babies is kind of like with the dogs, because either way, not toilet trained and can't speak. So
very similar, exactly.
Similar. Well, I love the fact that you're a veterinarian in that books that we're here to talk about. We're here to talk about specifically the MOONFALL Saga and this book, which is the second in the series, The Cradle of Ice. And I want to tout these books as books for animal lovers, for animals that don't really exist, which is me, because these books, I know they're written by someone who knows science and knows zoology and doesn't just fall back on some of the fantasy tropes of it's a unicorn or that's an elf or, okay, animals. I know elves are not animals. I'm not suggesting elves or dwarves are animals, but
well, they are by definition also.
We are also animals. I'm not trying to like diminish, and I'm not trying to throw elves and dwarves any shade. Like,
don't degrade.
You're lesser than. No. But the fact that you have these amazing animals, and we were talking beforehand, I listened to this book, and the narrator is fantastic. I highly recommend the narration. But then you got to find these pictures of these animals because I still need to know. Can you tell me, is there a sort of real world analog for what an orca is?
Yes. One of the very first books I wrote under my thriller moniker is a book called Ice Hunt, and it also had these walking whales. Because once upon a time, whales had limbs.
They did.
So I was going back to, if there was a change in the planet rotation and things were much more stressful and oceans became frozen or land became water became land, to adapt, the whales might basically devolve into resurrecting those limbs that they had lost, because basically physiologically whales still have the anatomy of still having limbs in there, and so it would not be that hard for them to devolve into needing those extra appendages. So the orcas, which are basically these winged sort of almost a cross between a narwhal and a walking whale.
And I was going with, well, the fact that it was orca, I'm thinking, okay, the word is similar to orca. So I'm going, is that intentional? I'm assuming it was.
It was.
And the horns, I'm going, it seems like a narwhal. I should have brought my kid's stuffed narwhal in here. She has a couple of them. One of them is clearly just a dolphin that someone stuck a unicorn on. Like, because it's not in the right place. Like, it should be here, not here. Like, the narwhal's horn is a tooth. How is it growing out of the middle of the top of its head? I'm kind of worried about it, but it's also animatronic and just goes off randomly. So if I brought it in, it would just start going during the show. Might be a little.
Could be good for a laugh track. I wouldn't mind that.
Instead of a laugh track, it's Windy the narwhal just going hee the whole time.
So yeah, it was fun. When I was building the idea for the story of a planet or fantasy novel set on a planet that stopped spinning in the past. Basically, I'm not going to ruin it. It's not going to ruin anything as the planet is Earth,
Yes.
because like on page 3, they call the planet Earth. So if you can figure it out, I spell it a little bit different, but it's pretty obvious. And so once this planet stops spinning, you have one side always facing the sun, one side internally in darkness, and the habitable climb between those extremes is really where most life can only survive. But life is going to find a way, both in
Always
the
does.
golden side and in the sun-blasted side. And so it was fun just as a veterinarian, leaning back on my biology background. I talked to astrobiologists, xenobiologists, trying to figure out how would life evolve in these planet of extremes. And so I began to, again, I didn't want to just put a dragon on a mountaintop because that's where dragons belong. I wanted to make the creatures evolve from their landscape, from the environmental niche in which they were basically struggling to survive in. And so I like building that bestiary to fit the environment. But what was also a lot of fun, which you mentioned the pictures, was in the first book and in the second book, there's about a dozen pictures of the different creatures that I describe in the novel. But my description of the novels are like most novels. I'm just going to give you sort of a thumbnail of what they look like, and I'm going to leave the imagination to fill in the gaps to the reader. But when I approached a Dana Fiddler, a wonderful graphic artist who has a biology background herself, to draw pictures of these sort of biological sketches, something you might find like in a naturalist turn of the century type of
very Audubon Society. That's what they feel like to me. Yeah.
So I'm going to make it feel like you're reading a scientific text from this world. And she wanted more details than I had. I give her a little description. Here you go. Here's an Orxa.
She's like, no, I need to know more about what's its spine doing. Can you tell me where are the joints? Are we
attached, and what's the musculature like so that would function that way? And hey, this creature has a tail, but how long is that tail? Is it prehensile? You have claws on this creature. Are they hooked? And then we talked about, well, this creature is arboreal, tree dwelling. Therefore, maybe it does have a prehensile tail because it's going to need that to, maneuver through the branches. And maybe it makes sense that the claws would be hooked to get a better grip on those surfaces. So those fine details we sort of hammered out between the two of us. So it was fun, going back and forth and challenging me, like, from an anatomical standpoint, from a physiological standpoint, from a morphological standpoint, how to make these creatures come alive so that they don't feel like just a pure, whimsical fantasy creature. I wanted them to feel like they belong to that environment.
Well, and it totally works that way because I loved how, so the first book, we leave with this group of explorers or this group of adventurers rather, and then they split off into different directions. And so even though we've gotten a good introduction in the first book, we're coming into new worlds and new animals and things that these people haven't seen as well as we haven't seen. So it's not just like, okay, second book, same world. It's like, no, we've got new things here and places. And again, you said life finds a way, where a lot of the story takes place in an area where our main characters didn't think there really was life. Like, oh, by the way, there's a lot going on over here that we didn't even know about, where prior explorers had basically just fallen off the map and never returned. And we find out, oh, well, there's a reason that they didn't return, and this is where they are and what they've done and how they've integrated themselves with that society and how that society has evolved differently and how that factors in. And I love that because then it was like, okay, same world, but a new expansion, like an expansion pack from the first.
Exactly.
New animals and variations on animals, including the bats. And I love all the bats in this. And again, you create these animals, and it has to come from your veterinary background because you approach it, yes, as a biologist, but these animals, again, you like to hurt me with your animals. You always do. You're like, I will always create an animal and make you fall in love with it, and then I'm going to do things and make you cry a lot. So not happy about that, but it's a good talent, I guess. I care about humans, I really do. But if you want me to start crying, hurt an animal, or make me care about an animal, put an animal in peril, and then I'm worried.
Same way, basically. Whenever I teach writing, I always say you should write from a point of passion. So, I love animals. So, this on my brain that was trained to be a veterinarian, from third grade, I knew I wanted to be a veterinarian. But when I stopped practicing full time, a weird thing began happening. And I wasn't aware of it. There's an old adage: writers are naked on the page. You reveal a lot more of yourself on when you write than you think you do. And I thought that was hogwash. I thought, whatever, I don't believe that. until I got this email from this gentleman that said, "Hey, I'm reading your series of novels and enjoying them, but how come, like, about 8 or 9 novels in, suddenly all of your characters seem to have these animal sidekicks? This one has an orphan jaguar cub. This is a wolf rescue dog. This is a military working dog. How come?" And I realized that when that transition occurred, when I basically was still writing and practicing full time, I was getting this side of my brain was happily being
Right.
satisfied with my veterinary career.
Uh-huh.
But once I stopped practicing full time, unbeknownst to me, my desire to be still, involved with animals, crept into my writing. So all of a sudden, all these animals started to appear in my novels because I wasn't getting the outlet from a daily veterinary medicine. And maybe I've been now not practicing full time, even though I do some volunteer work with a spay neuter clinic. Uh, I'm not getting my full
You're not getting your
satisfaction
fix.
of that side. I'm not getting my fix. So this fantasy series is chock full of animals simply
Yes.
because now I'm a couple decades out of my full time practice. So it's I'm going to make you
We're gonna feel it.
all about the animals that I love, and I will do mean things to them just to make you cry.
Well, you do it very well, and I could say maybe the farther away you go, it's just gonna be full animal characters. We don't even need people anymore. It's gonna be talking animals, a la Disney. I mean, I laugh because like all of them have animal sidekicks, and then I wonder if you're secretly writing Disney princesses because they all have the animal sidekicks too. But they're not usually like military working dogs and things like that. But you've put animals in peril, whether they're animals we know or biologically, like genetically augmented animals, because I've read that. I know Igor the parrot still makes me cry just to think about. And then now you've got all these animals, and they're not even animals I can go to the zoo and look at and go, oh, that reminds me of, because they aren't even real animals, other than kind of the
Well,
bats.
Igor was
Igor was. He was a
Igor,
parrot.
yeah, that was my parrot I had. I adopted from a client of mine brought in. She was like 80 something years old. She brought in this old parrot. Well, not old, a 65-year-old parrot, and said, "Hey, I want to euthanize Igor." And I said, "Well, our policy is we don't euthanize healthy animals. So if you can't take care of them, we will find a home for them." Being a large part of my practice was birds. I always loved birds, and so I ended up adopting Igor myself. And Igor was sort of an irascible character. The story was that her son had purchased the bird when it was like a hand-fed baby. They as life goes on, she lost her son. So the bird was adopted by her and her husband. They had the bird for 20 years. The bird hated her, loved her husband, which some birds are. Sometimes they are like they adopt one person. And so then her husband passed away, and now she is, left with this bird that hates her.
Hates her.
So it's like a
I shouldn't laugh at this. Like
girls
also
who-
these things, and then her own pet hates her. It's like
yeah.
that sounds like the kind of luck I'd have. Like, great, even my own pet doesn't like me.
But she put up with them until her doctor said, "Hey, the feather dust from this bird is affecting you from you're getting lung infections from this. You need to get rid of your bird." So that's how Igor ended up in my life, and that's how come Igor ended up in Altar of Eden as the character in that story. So there's always a little personal part of that.
Didn't realize Igor was a real bird. And we talked to you, but when we had you on Vox Vomitus and I talked to you a little bit about Altar of Eden, you were releasing a series of short stories within another series. So we weren't specifically on for that. So I didn't get into it that much. So I didn't know Igor's backstory or his tragic backstory or how much he hated his owner. So did he transition well to the new home? Did he like you better than his former owner?
I think maybe it was just, I don't know, some birds bond to male or female. They seem to bond to, I don't know, the timber deeper boars. I don't know what it is that they key in on, but or maybe he was just happy to get away from her. So he was just,
maybe it was a mutual thing. Like neither one of them liked each other, and he took out
both ways. So I had Igor for 20 years. So he had died when he was 85 years old. So he was
I don't think people have any idea how long certain birds live, because I think people mostly think of, okay, rodents usually don't have a very long shelf life. Cats live a bit longer. Dogs totally depends on the breed. But I mean, a bird's going to outlive me. If I were to get a parrot now, it would absolutely outlive me. So figure out what you're doing.
Exactly.
Yeah, I mean, I think we think of turtles. Turtles live a long time, but I don't think we recognize that birds also can have a really different lifespan than humans. And what do you do with a pet that's going to outlive you? Like, I know that people have to worry about when you go into a nursing home or like an assisted living center, can you bring your little dog or your cat? And some of them can, and some of them you can't. And then where do those animals go? So
Exactly.
it gets tricky. Well, no one's trying to rehome any meerbats right now or any orcsas, mostly because they don't exist. Okay, Joanne Paulson says she wants to be reincarnated as a bird plus flying. See, okay, Joanne, you got to specify though, because if you're a penguin or an emu, you're not going to get to fly. You can swim, maybe, or run really fast, but you got to put that fine detail before you get reincarnated. Okay, be
Like
careful with
that
that.
monkey paw wish. You got to be careful
Yes.
with quite, fine detail of your wish.
Well, it's like the djinn. They always have like, oh, you wish for this, but it's going to be bad. We're going to find a bad way. Okay, Joanne wants to be a parrot. That's fine. You can be a parrot, Joanne. That's fine. But I mean, if I want to fly, I think I'd rather be a bat because I think I want to stick with the mammals. I want to stick with things that I understand. I don't know about the whole hollow bones thing. I don't know if okay, Joanne's just listing more birds now. Eagle. But I loved the inclusion of a variation on the type of bats because we, in the first book, for those who've read the first book, we have these mere bats who are an integral part of one of our main characters, Nyx, and her family and her backstory. And she was basically raised by a bat or was suckled by a bat, basically. And there's some very sweet imagery in both books about how she was basically a litter mate with this other bat. And then they go to this new place, and there are some other creatures there that are kind of terrifying in comparison to the meerbats. And I'm sitting there trying to think of scale, how big these things are. And I'm just going, okay, they're bigger than me. Everything's bigger than me. They'll probably try to eat me. This is going to go badly for me. But you also have something that's introduced that we often don't think about in terms of mammals, which is the hive mind. And I don't know how that all interplayed with the idea of the bridal song and this kind of mental control. And when you have a group of animals that have a hive mind, what was the inspiration for that and working that into the plot?
Well, one of the reasons first, I'm fascinated by bats to begin with. So that was one of the reasons that the mere bats became a major part of the story. But I also like the fact that, bats communicate ultrasonically. And even now today, finding biologists now are finding that the extent of ultrasonics is not just simply a matter of echolocation for seeing things. There's a whole intricate level of communication that occurs with their echo sounding. And so I was fascinated by that. And so I got to thinking, if someone was slightly genetically engineering bats to be biological sentinels, the bats would not be a bad choice because you can theoretically create sort of a hive mind in this species, similar to bees and other hive mind type of species, where you can use the ultrasonic to bind them all together. And then I got thinking, I didn't want the magic in my world to be just magic. I wanted sort of a scientific basis for it. So, bridal song is the ability of some people where they can use their own voice and song basically to manipulate their environment, to control other beasts. But I didn't want just to be, oh, you're just magically endowed to be able to do this. I wanted the fact that somebody genetically created these genes to make these bats be able to communicate this way. And what if that gene ends up via, blood transfusion or predation, ends up being incorporated into some genetic human lines where that gene becomes a part of certain genetic lines, and that gives you also the ability to put, not as well as the meerbat can, but you can basically use a form of ultrasonics to control your environment. So that's where that all came about.
Well, and I liked how it also worked together both on the human side and the incorporation of the human powers so that you also sometimes had people acting in concert. So it's like, okay, this is too much for one person to do, but drawing together multiple powers and acting as like amplification or as a power boost. And then some people have different abilities within that. And again, some of it's genetic. But I like what you said about it being like a genetic manipulation. Like this did not just naturally occur. So like you said, kind of spoiler alert, that this really is Earth. We aren't given quite a sense of how far past our day that this is happening, but it's so far in the future that we can't really even imagine. But so of course, every time something happens, I'm thinking, okay, at what point in our past did this start happening, and what was the impetus to do that, and what was the technology that led it there? Which brings me to Shia and the bronze people. I don't even remember if I talked to you that much about Shia and the bronze statues last time, even though it's a big part of the book and it's a bigger part in the second book. Yep. As the concept of who these bronze creatures are, these bronze people, for lack of a better word, and learning about who may have created them and why they were created and what their purpose is and what their goals are and whether they are trustworthy individuals. Like, I can't think of any analog in anything else I've read that is like that. Like, yes, they're like living statues, but not exactly.
Well, my idea for creating these, basically, I don't think I'm going to too much, is that the bats were basically engineered to be biological sentinels to monitor for any disaster, knowing that the ancient past, when the world began to slowly start to spin, people became concerned, what's going to happen. We need to prepare for that. It's going to be a total breakdown of society. Civilization is collapse. We're most likely all the technology will be forgotten about. So we need to start anticipating that. So they built these biological sentinels to monitor, to be basically watching for dangers, and specifically they were worried about the moon crashing into the earth, which is a big threat for this series. Is that Nyx has a prophecy that the moon is crashing into the world. Alchemist, the planet, knows, hey, the moon's incrementally growing larger. Something's wrong here. So back in the past, I worried that there's a possibility, because even today, when I was speaking to scientists about creating a tidally locked planet, I asked them, well, what would happen to the moon if you had a moon like our moon?
Mhm.
What would happen to the moon if the world stopped spinning? And like right now, very slowly, the moon is drifting away from our world. Very incrementally, at this point, the moon keeps drifting away. And but when the planet stops spinning, that might either accelerate that, or it might reverse that and start causing the moon to crash into the planet. So I imagine that in the past, scientists were aware of this threat. So they wanted to leave biological monitors. So they created the meerbats, engineered the meerbats. But of course, meerbats don't have opposable thumbs. So they needed somebody that can manipulate the environment in greater detail. So they also created these automatons, basically AI-driven automatons that would also be buried as sleepers around the planet, that the bats could awake with their ultrasounds when danger was alerted, and they could come up and try to correct what needs to be corrected. But of course, AIs being AIs, they don't exactly want to go along with everything that was previously plotted. So
I never trust the AI.
So there's a friction between a group that's still trying to obey their masters that said you need to save the planet, versus the others that say, well, do we really need humans? We could survive just fine on a desolate ruined planet. All we need is resources. So that becomes a friction as the storyline in the books continues. It's a 4-book arc. This is the second book in the 4-book arc, and you're going to see that become more and more of a problem.
Well, it's definitely going to be a bigger problem as things go on, but you also have not just friction between the natural world and humanity in it, or past humanity and things that they set in motion, but of course, you can't go anywhere without having just humans fighting with humans. That's kind of just what we like to do. And there was so much betrayal in this, and I had to actually do a page, because since I was listening to it, I had to get all the different alliances. I'm like, okay, so this king has these kids, and then this one's engaged to this person. I don't think he really wants to be engaged to her, though, but I don't think he was ever given much of a choice. But then he's not the next in line, but maybe he is, because twins. There was so much there. Do you have a chart somewhere where you can keep track of who is engaged to who lost their head halfway through the book, who got a scar, who lost a hand? There's a lot going on.
A whole Bible of the storyline that I keep track of everything, and you'll find some addendums in the 3rd book where you'll get some, in case you forget. Because I don't encourage people to jump in the 2nd book. Some people have jumped in the 2nd book and they seem to still understand it enough. I don't think I could have jumped in the 2nd book and understand it. It's really, no. When I do my Sigma Force series, I always encourage people, you can just join it, jump in anywhere, because it's a episodic type of series.
Yeah.
I'm going to preload whatever you need to know for that book. I'm going to let you know. Whereas I always describe fantasy series more as one big book chopped into pieces.
Slice.
Like there's a little, crisis points that are dealt with in each book, but ultimately it's basically a big story. And so as the story gets on, it gets bigger and bigger, and I need to recognize that. So in the 3rd book, I am a compendium, so you can refer back to.
I'm going to definitely need that, because I was making notes this time. And again, since I was listening to it, it would probably have been easier if I could just turn back and confirm, okay, so this person, okay, Jubaya is related to, and then, okay, that's the brother, because you've got some of these families are larger and rural families. And then it didn't help me because I'm looking at the map from book 1. I'm going, Kissalimri isn't even on here. And then I'm just trying to pretend I don't even know how to spell some of these things because I'm not seeing them written down, going, I like that name. Is that a real place? Of course it's not a real place. But then because we are looking at a world that's very far distant from our world, I was worrying about some of the cultural backgrounds, mostly because I just want to cast the right actors when this becomes an HBO thing. Not that they're going to consult me. No one's ever asked me for consultation on any casting for any shows. I just would like to be consulted personally.
Me too.
Well, hopefully, I mean, this definitely would translate to something like, because it's so immersive and expansive with the different casting and the sprawl of the families and the different kingdoms and alignments. And there's this political intrigue. So on one storyline, we've got people going on more of a straight adventure story and dealing with what are they going to find in the wild. And the other places, we've got kidnappings and people being aligned for marriages that may or may not happen. And then, wait, are you even allowed to be over there? Oh no, your places you're not supposed to be. It gets very, very complicated quickly. And my brain was like, hold on, I'm gonna write this down.
Yeah, I mean, basically, the first book I introduced the cast of characters, and in Cradle of Ice, I split them up. You know, one half goes out into the frozen half of the world, and they have a mission to accomplish. At the same time, they're being pursued by the enemy. They uncover a vast new sort of society and world on that everybody considered to be frozen or inhospitable and desolate, but life finds a way, and it did. And whereas on the crown itself, which is the habitable climb between those two extremes, war has been brewing for a while. There's hints of that in the first book, some friction at the beginning, people, butting heads, and it comes to a breaking point in this novel where it's no longer just the drums of war, it's outright war.
Exactly. Well, and then because we have some of the characters that we'd already met and seeing them going, okay, by the way, you're over there now and you have this role to play, but you may not be able to accomplish that because you're being kidnapped by other folks and you're being used as a pawn in this political war as people are vying for power. And then we bring back in the sentinels and other characters that are having their own sway on things, because it's like, oh, it's not just politics, it's also bringing in, well, what's best for the world, not just for this particular kingdom, and how is that going to impact with the prophecy and with Moonfall? Because I don't see how the moon falling into the earth could ever be a good thing. It seems like something we'd want to avoid.
Exactly.
So when you worked with all of that and having your maps and figuring out where things are going, what was your inspiration as far as some of these political leaders? Was there anybody that you were like, okay, I want to draw on this person's ambition or this person's charisma, or are you just making these people up going, I need this guy over here?
It's a combination of both. Some of it is just, pure imagination, but also it's basic on geopolitics of our world, and people don't change. We've been, if you don't learn from history, you're going to repeat history. And that's what's happening even, millennia and millennia after the world stops spinning, is, people are going to protect their territory. People are going to have their pride hurt, or they want to have more glory. So each person has their sort of own ambition in this world, because no one quite believes Nix and the others that the moon's going to crash into the planet. They're not concerned about the greater war. Like, and again, that slight analogy for climate change is that there's a big global disaster pending, but we're going to fight petty wars along the Russian border, or we're going to have these geopolitical fights here in the U.S. While there's a bigger threat reigning. So that's sort of what's happening in this world, is that yes, there's a bigger threat reigning, and people are trying to address it. At the same time, life goes on. There's going to be these petty squabbles. There's going to be these internecine wars. And so it's a great deal of just conflict everywhere.
Well, and you still have that even now, but the idea of, okay, well, how would the world look in the future, and how did that impact them in terms of, okay, did they learn from any of this? And the answer is clearly no, that they didn't learn from any of the stuff in the past. And some of the technology has been lost, but then they're finding new ways. So some of the things, even in terms of the weapons that you describe, and I'm going, okay, is that a nuke? I don't know if that's a nuke. That might not be quite a nuke, but because one of the things, and it kind of goes even back into the animals, is the languages have been lost. So none of them are speaking English, and none of them are using the same terms we use. And so even if, okay, Orxa is kind of similar, they're discovering new ways of powering their ships, so that at a certain point in the book, it's like, well, we can't go on with what we have in our resources. but this society is using some other way and they're refining this other raw element. And I'm going, okay, should I know what that is, or did you just make that up? And I'll never know. You can tell me afterwards. But it's hard to know, because it's like, oh, but did they lose refining technology, or did they lose solar technology? And how is that impacted with something like the moon coming closer and closer? And how does that impact our ability to use geothermal or solar power? And how does that impact us with climate change as well? Like what can we continue to use, and what can we use more, or what can we use to fight climate change? And then we're just like, well, let's just squabble about smaller things and just let the earth stop spinning. That's fine.
Exactly. I mean, I like when I was building the layers to this world. When your fantasy world building is multi-layered, you need to look at every bit of, from technology to religion to the science to philosophy to just the day in day out of living in this world. Some of it is the language. Would these people call a spoon a spoon? You can go way crazy and have.
I just went to Ariel and the Little Mermaid, and she's got her little. She's combing her hair with the fork, and they're going, "Oh, that's a snarfplat, and this is a dinglehopper." Like, you didn't call anything dinglehoppers, and I appreciate that.
Sure. So a balance between being welcoming to the reader about so you don't get every word has to be different, but at the same time there's going to be new technologies, and humans are very inventive, and we're going to find ways of manipulating our environment to serve our ends. And so we see different types of technology developing. Some of it's very old school, some of it's twists on old school, some of it's brand new stuff.
Well, I enjoyed reading all of it, even if I had to stop and go, what is that? And never get an answer to it. So sometimes it's fun to let my brain play with it, but then I've got to stop and then back up, because my brain wandered off thinking about that, and I missed the next 3 lines, and I go, hold on, something just happened. Back it up so I can get back there. So you said this is out of 4. I was hoping this wouldn't be a trilogy, because I felt like by the time we were done with this book, there's too much to put in one book, and I didn't want you to give me an 8 million page book because it was a trilogy. Like, make those 4. So where are you in terms of, are you done with the 3rd book in terms of writing it, or is it all written and we're revising it? When do we get the 3rd book?
I'm just finishing up. Probably the end of April, I should have the draft over to my editor, and then it's scheduled probably for January, February, March of next year. So it'll be about the same time of this release next year.
This is like an annual tradition now. I get a James Rollins book.
Exactly. I don't want to leave people hanging too long between. I don't want to. Exactly.
Well, and it also helps when you have something this complicated. I appreciate that you're going to add something like a compendium in the 3rd book to help people go, okay, it may have been a minute since you read the first 2, to be able to remember who people are, where they were, who's alive, who's maimed, who's now married, get it all matched up the way it should be, and then start the story. But are you working just on the Moonfall Saga right now, or are you working on some of your sci-fi stuff? Because when I first started reading you were action adventure sci-fi guy, and I didn't know that you had secretly been writing fantasy under another pen name, Dr. Jim, hiding your identities behind these nefarious pen names. But now we're back to the fantasy. So is this taking up everything, or are you still doing some of the
both.
action stuff?
I've always done 2 books a year, and so I'm continuing to do that.
Especially when your books are this big, that's a lot.
Exactly. It's a little more challenging when you're dealing with fantasy and thriller, because the fantasies are big. I mean, they don't have to be door stoppers. It's just that's what I love to read. To me, I don't like fantasies that are too thin, because by the time you sort of learn the world and learn the characters, it's over. Because I'm asking for investment of time from my readers, and I'm going to ask them to, you're going to have to learn a lot about this world. And so, and hopefully if you enjoy it, you're going to want to spend time in this world. So I want to honor that by making the book chunky.
The chunky books. Well, and I think for fantasy readers, that's pretty much what's expected. And when it's a fantasy that's not what they would say like a second world fantasy or a high fantasy, then you can maybe get it with a thinner book, but then we're kind of talking about a different genre at that point, versus something where you're in an immersive world that's very different than our own world, and you have to be in a place where you can dwell and really feel that world. And if it's like, it's just a quick 60,000 words, you wouldn't even gotten a feel for it, and it would feel thin. It would feel not satisfying to really be in that world and get the feel of like, what's it like for these people. I mean, you've got everything from, like you said, these different religions and the way the different political parties and different political alliances are happening, and people maybe not being in the same alliance that they thought, and people showing up where you don't expect them. That doesn't work if you don't have the layers there to draw on and go, well, why would this person not align with them? Well, it only makes sense if you know, okay, well, this is a place of oppression and this person's against the oppression, even if they're from a privileged class. And why would it matter? Like, I always think it's funny in fantasy that we kind of always devolve back to monarchy and totalitarian governments. Like, I would love the utopia of in the future where there's democracy. There never seems to be democracy in the future. Why not? But it never seems to happen.
You'll see that the third book.
Well, hopefully, because you're driving towards that with some of your characters pushing for I can't say the word egalitarian. There we go. Egalitarian treatments and things like that, versus just, hey, you got to be born first from the right parentage, therefore you're in charge. And then what happens when leaders are corrupt or corrupted or not in their right mind anymore, and then who takes over? And then let's all fight about that too, especially when the moon's about to crash and it seems not quite as important.
Yeah, exactly. It's I mean, I enjoy exploring different types of society. So we saw the Kingdom of Hallandale and how that's driven. You've seen the Southern Clash and how that's the second book, and we've seen the society and the Ice Kingdom. And as we explore the third book, we're going to be going to the Sunblasted side of the planet for the third book, and you're going to find a whole new world there that has evolved in an entirely different manner. So it's fun. I mean, that's what, as a writer, I enjoy just sort of figuring out what not only what life, but biological life is going to be coming from that, but how a society, if there is a society in such a place of extremes, what that might look like. If you're in an icebound type of society, it's probably going to be fairly intimate because everybody's depending on everybody else to survive.
For body heat
alone. And so, so I like the idea of just trying to look at, how would a society develop if it was under that type of extreme environmental pressure. So that's fun for me to explore and build these layers in. And I think this hopefully makes the world feel more like it's just not a pure fantastical piece of fiction, but something that feels more grounded.
Well, and I feel like calling yours, I don't know if anybody's labeled it science fantasy, but that's what it feels like to me because there is so much science. And that's what I really appreciate, because when someone just snaps a finger and says, yes, and there are magical things and they shoot rainbows out of their eyeballs just because it sounds cool. It's cool, I guess, but it doesn't have that weight to it, because I feel like, okay, I don't know every planet. This is the only one we know really with life, but there could be other places that had those things, but I want to see the process of how those things evolved and why the society would have reflected these things because of what it grew up in, because that's how societies are all over and have been through history. But as soon as you said like the side that's sunblasted, I mean, it makes sense that we're going there next. I want Gila monsters and Mad Max and really maybe sentient cactuses. I don't know if you can work that in. You're probably done in saying there are no sentient cactuses in this.
Well, I can try to fold them in there.
Please. You're like, there will not be any of that. It's like aloe vera for everything. It's aloe vera is like their Windex. It's in everything. We eat it. We rub it on. I like aloe vera. It's good stuff. It's pale skin, burns easy. Aloe. I mean, someone like me would not do well in the sun side. I need to be kind of in the kind of warm place, and I wouldn't do well in the snow either. I would freeze.
So you asked me earlier, and I sort of sidestepped the question. Was is there anything else I'm working on?
Yes.
So there's my next Sigma novel is coming out in August. It's called Tides of Fire. I describe it as sort of a disaster movie in novel format. I think I'm the most destructive I've ever been in that.
Yes.
I'm notorious for destroying a lot of stuff on the planet. I always describe my goal in life as an author is to eventually blow up every World Heritage site on the planet.
Oh, nice. Do you have a checklist somewhere?
Check them off. I checked off a lot in this next book.
See, one of my friends, she has now traveled to all 7 continents. She just got back from Antarctica, and she took like the little thing from Dr. Seuss, all the places you'll go, and checks off each one. But see, you have very different goals because you're just trying to destroy them. Not in real life. But, what can I do to an ice place? Well, this would be really destructive. But if you're going with the next book here and you're trying to do like a disaster movie, does that mean we will get a movie from one of these? Who do we have to bribe to make that happen? Because I want to see some of these on big screens.
The Sigma Force series is another option. And just a couple months ago, they renewed the option, which I think is a good sign because I think no one's ever renewed them before.
I didn't even know you could do that. I've heard about people like, well, yeah, we sold the rights and then nothing happened with it.
And
Okay.
I've sold the rights to a lot of different projects. But the fact that this company has gone ahead and renewed the option, I think, is a positive sign that, and they're looking to do the Sigma Force series more as an episodic series versus a single film, which I'm sort of happy about because it'd be hard to pare down, the complication of a Sigma novel into, 2-hour movie.
2 hours. No. And I feel like, especially with people watching more things like on Netflix and HBO and Apple and things like Amazon Prime, we really prefer that now. And I feel like it used to be, oh, well, the book is always better than the movie. And yeah, the book's better than the movie. But if we can get a TV show out of it, the TV show may be able to go to the same kind of depths and explore new things that even the book didn't do. So I would like HBO to make a version of the Moonfall Saga because they have the budget, I think.
Yeah,
Again, no one asked me these things, but I would love to see that, and I want to see these creatures because we now have the CG to make these things look real. I don't want to see. Okay, I did like the Clash of the Titans style where it's old and claymation. That was kind of fun, but the 80s through 90s bad CG, I don't want any of that. I want 2020 and beyond level CG where these things look real, like Rocket Raccoon, where you can pet the fur. I want to be able to pet the fur on all your animals.
I agree with that.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, I would love to see it, brought to the big screen or a little screen or whatever. You describe the fantasy series as a scientific fantasy, which is what I also describe it as.
Yes.
And I describe my Sigma books as scientific thrillers because I get a lot of science in my thrillers. In those Sigma novels, I start from a grounded place, but by the end of the novel, I'm going to take you somewhere pretty fantastical. And it takes me, the 140,000 words to get from point A to point Z. So to me, I think it's going to take a series also to convincingly take your viewer from the beginning of that series to the fantastical end of that series to try to combine that into just a 90-minute 2-hour movie. It's hard to pull off to make that authentic and real. So hopefully they will continue to do that.
I feel like novellas translate well to a movie. But anything longer than a novella, you're going to start losing it. And that's what sometimes we've had. But beyond that, sometimes it's kind of hard to do it.
Well, I think one of the reasons why books always feel, more, or books are better than the films is that someone has to be cut out of a book to become a movie.
Mm-hmm.
And I reverse engineered that. I was tapped to do the novelization to the fourth Indiana Jones movie. And so I had the script while they were filming it, and I had to turn it into a novel, which means then I have to add. So I had about like 12 different scenes that were never in the films because I need to flesh out the story.
How many times did you see the movie then? Or did you just have the script to work with?
I had the script to work with, and I had like a secret website where I could see the dailies being shot because, again, the script is not that descriptive about, similar to like doing the graphic artists of the creatures. The script is going to give you a bare bones description of what a character looks like or what some of the action is occurring. And so have the daily so I can see what exactly the uniform they're wearing. I can see exactly what that Jeep they're driving in looks like, or that train. So that then I can incorporate, because they wanted the book to come out the same day that the movie came out. So I had to write the book in tandem with the production of the film.
Okay, there's no pressure there.
Not at all. It was a great deal of fun.
Very stressful.
Great deal of fun, especially when I learned that it's better to ask for forgiveness than permission, because initially I thought I'd have to, run my changes, my additions to the story past, the powers that be. And a lot of times I was getting pushback whenever I did. So I'm just going to write it.
Just write it. And then just say, my version's canon.
So
I don't care what Harrison Ford did. I wrote it.
They eventually, I turned it in, and it's like I had like one note that they wanted me to change, but that was it. Otherwise, if I had done it every single time, I'm sure I've been beating my head against the wall.
That sounds like an unpleasant process to have to do that for each part. So it's like, let me just write what I want. You'll like it. Just let's just go with it. And then afterwards, people can go, wow, the book was amazing. I didn't even know there was a book version of it, but I realized they do that so often with anything that has a book and then it becomes a movie. They then release a new cover. But now with everything from Star Wars and everything, like everything has a cinematic universe, has novelizations,
Yep.
because there's a demand for it. So of course there would be, even if I would never have gone looking for an Indiana Jones book, but you wrote one. That's awesome.
Fun. Yeah, because basically the beginning of the fourth Indiana Jones and the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull.
Mm-hmm.
The first time you see Indy, he's popping out of the trunk of a vehicle. He's been captured, but nowhere in that film does it say how he got captured.
Did you give us that backstory?
Pretty wild, pretty wily. So how did somebody it wouldn't be easy to capture Indy. So in the first 40 pages of my novel is how Indy gets captured.
Can you tell us how he got captured?
He's out in Mexico on a mission, and a little foobar occurs, and of course, because of that, he ends up getting captured. But this again takes 40 pages to describe it. So
rather than just Indy's in a trunk, then he ends up in a refrigerator. So I mean, I think that's what most of us took away from that movie was Indy's in a refrigerator to survive a nuclear blast. It works.
Yeah, exactly.
It's great. Nuclear blast work. Dr. Jim, it has been amazing getting to talk to you again. I cannot wait to read the third book, and I'm probably going to start with the compendium part to remind myself of everybody, or I'll just look at my notes, because I took good notes this time, like a good student writing down, and I crossed off people's names as you killed them off. So there's that. But I am so excited for people to catch up on the MOONFALL Saga and read this second book, The Cradle of Ice, and then go read. It's all the same pen name now. You're no longer using your other fantasy.
Yeah, I mean, it seems
for Rollins.
It felt very disingenuous to resurrect my old pen name, because even back then it got a little awkward, because I'd show up at a book event, I'm James Clemens, and here's my fantasy novel. And then 6 months later, I'm James Rollins. No, you're not. I was here before.
Well, and I had a friend who recently signed, and she signed under her pen name, and her picture is still her. I'm like, this is not a very good disguise anymore. That's still you. We know it's all you. And I write under 2 pen names, but they're both versions of me, so it's fine. Just you dye your hair and put on some sunglasses and go totally different person. Then you need the voice modulator too. But I would love to have you back for book 3, or see you for more of your Sigma Force books. It's amazing to get to read and talk to you. Thank you for your time. Everybody, thank you for joining us live. If you're watching this on YouTube, please make sure you like the video and subscribe to the Vox Vomitus channel so you can watch episodes of To the Moon Allison and Vox Vomitus and Let's Scare Jennifer to Death. And we'll see you guys next time. Bye.